Don't you think it's time for the city of Savannah to have an honest tourism management plan? Let SCAD start paying its fair share? And the hospitality industry needs to increase its wages? The impacts of new growth should not cost residents. All local elected officials on council and commission should have term limits. We're working hard to accomplish these policies. We need your help. Please contribute whatever you can, $5, $10, or $20, by going to bettersavannah.org. Donate. Thank you.
I am a parent and I am not a teacher. I am not a subject matter expert. Therefore, I do not need to choose the curriculum for my child. However, I do think it is a collaborative process, the education process of our kids. I always tell our kids, teachers, help me, help you, help my child. So that means even though I may not choose the curriculum, I can help my student learn that curriculum.
Help me, help you, help me, help you.
The following show and broadcast is a production of Better Savannah, an independent expenditure committee dedicated to better policy outcomes at the state and local level. The views, opinions, and statements made by the hosts and/or their guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Better Savannah.
John?
Chuck, good evening.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good night, John. It's episode 82 of the Better Savannah podcast, the third rail, part one. The next week here, 2 weeks here, we're going to be, should be interviewing all three of the candidates for school board president. I know that we're trying to get scheduled all three of them right now, but we should get all three of them interviewed over the next 2 weeks. A lot of interesting stuff happening around town. What'd you say, John?
Do we have commitments from from Todd Rhodes and Roger.
Yeah. Todd is committed for next Thursday, a week from now. And Roger is trying to work around a scheduling conflict for the following week. So I'll keep you posted about when we might pre-record that and then release it on a Thursday for a normal episode. We'll see. I'm sure people will be in touch with us after the show, I'm sure. But I was just thinking before we get started, there's a lot going on around town, John. We've got elections for state house, state senate, school board. The city council had a very in-depth discussion on the future of the civic center site, which I think we should talk about on a future episode. Just a lot of really cool things. But tonight we are going to kick off our candidate series interviews for the school board president with a candidate who ran last time 4 years ago and finished in third, very respectable third, over a quarter of the county. I think has already cast a ballot for Tye Whitley. Tye is a parent of three. I know that there's another candidate that has more kids in the school system, but I think she would tell you probably three is enough. At least that's what I'm told. But she's a parent. She's a PTA leader, former PTA president, treasurer, and is an early education administrator for a Chunks Learning Center. We're very, very happy to have Tye. I want to go ahead and add her in here. Tye Whitley is running for school board president. I know that I was telling you earlier that your husband was on the very first episode of Better Savannah, but I'm glad that we finally get a chance to interview the better half of the Whitley household here tonight. Welcome to the show, Tye.
Thank you for having me. I'll take that better half compliment.
Absolutely, I do mean it as a compliment. You're not this is not your first time running. You ran 4 years ago. Before we get into our questions, what have you learned through the COVID crisis? And I mean, a lot has changed in the world since the last time you ran for this office. What have you learned in the last 4 years, and what do you think it means for this race?
What I've learned in the last 4 years is that education is still the most important. It's the most important thing in our young kids' lives. I knew that before, but seeing the changes in the school system, the changes over COVID, and how it impacted learning and how that learning affects our kids. This is the number one issue for parents, and it is the most important thing for young people to have a good education and to learn as much as they can before they leave our houses.
Gotcha. Well, I want to jump right into it. One of your principal opponents, there's only three people running for this race, and one of your main opponents is running on a central platform of school choice. This is kind of known by a lot of things. The charter school movement, the voucher movement, whatever it is. There are varying degrees to it, and I think we'll get into it in this discussion. But just in general, what are your thoughts on charter schools and school choice?
So I do think that parents need viable options when it comes to education. I'm not against charter schools. My nephew actually went to Oglethorpe Charter School, and it was a very good experience for him. I am for schools that are good schools and have provide parents with options and a quality education. So if you're a charter school and you can do that, fine. If you're a traditional public school and you can do that, even better.
Do you think the school system, do you think Savannah Chatham County Public Schools should be investing the general fund dollars, the per student dollars that we have, whether it's the funding from the state, federal, or our local property tax base? Should we be investing more of our tax dollars into these types of schools?
I wouldn't say that we should invest in all of our charter schools. If our charter schools provide a good option for education, because they do have a certain way of doing things. For instance, I'll go back to Oglethorpe because that is what I had an experience with. Their disciplinary options for students were greatly varied, and provided a very good option for my nephew, who's a young Black man. So I like their approach as opposed to the approach of some of the traditional public schools. But I think we should only invest in things that will give our kids good choices. And if charter schools are not performing well, or they are an investment that isn't quite working out, when that charter comes back up for reevaluation, then I think we need to look at it critically and say, is this a good option for our county?
You know, it occurs to me, Tye, that there's going to be history made in Chatham County this year for school board president, no matter what. All three candidates for school board president are African American. It'll be the first time we've ever had a school board president. And I think a lot of this choice charter voucher type of movement, like I said, I think there's varying degrees of it. But I think there's a lot of marketing and, types, just pitches. And for a school system like ours, for a county that is, 50-50, high concentration of poverty, especially in the principal municipality of Savannah, I think this type of platform gives a lot of hope, right? It's like if we could just, and I want to play this clip for you because we've played this on the show a couple times for some other people and had a members only discussion the other day with an education expert at the state level. And I think this is what a lot of people, that they want to believe that this is what the choice movement is. So let's just watch this and talk about it on the other side.
What happened in Central Harlem was failure became the norm. The schools were lousy, the healthcare was lousy, gangs were prevalent, violence was all over, families were falling apart. You can't raise children in a community like that. People had been talking about things, but not doing anything.
Okay, how are
I'm doing great. How about you? Right here on 119th Street. If we could fix this block, then we could fix the next block, then we could fix the next block. We promise parents, if your child stays with us, I guarantee you that child is going to graduate from college. Failure is simply not an option. 60 to 70 to 80 to 97 blocks, which ends up being 10,000 children. We start with children from birth and stay with those children until they graduate. If you really want to have an impact that is large, you'll get there going one step at a time. There is no act that is too small to make a difference.
No matter what you want to do, Members Project from American Express can help you take the first step. Vote, volunteer, or donate.
So I love that, simply because, especially the ending, right? For those who don't know, that's Jeffrey Canada, who is probably one of the country's premier, type of choice charter, and what a lot of the best case examples of charter schools won't tell you is the massive amount of private funding needed and necessary. And just to use Harlem Children's Zone as the example, Jeffrey over the years, was able to secure massive amounts of funding and use those primarily for wraparound services, which made the educational experience possible for families from a disadvantaged background. So, again, there's all this kind of marketing that's geared towards saving a population that's historically underserved, particularly here in Savannah. We think about the connection between educational outcomes and crime. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. But again, just within this, how do you balance kind of the innovative wraparound services approach of a school, like that has very documented success, with the fact that we don't have the money to fund that for enough students, and so we don't want to fund some and disadvantage others. Your thoughts, Tye?
Right. So I think that people need to understand that charter schools, even some of them are public schools, they're really a hybrid between public and private schools, right? I don't think it is necessarily a bad thing that they can offer that to students, but I do think that people have to realize that there's a difference between our public schools that are 100% funded by, taxes, the state and the federal government, and then those schools who are funded partially by the public school system and then partially by private schools. And that affords them the opportunity to, have a governing board. So their board is the last stop. If you have an issue at a public school, our school board doesn't, get into that. And so parents, it's kind of a give and take. You can take the smaller class sizes, the fund wraparound services if they do offer those, because they may not offer those things in their charter, and be a part of, I would say, more governance is just more of a governing factor in the charter schools, or you can be a part of the public schools who don't have an option, right? They have to take every child, they have to provide certain services, and they're limited in their funds. However, they take every child as they are. So making that that distinction between both, I think, informs parents, of their options. As a parent, I don't like to take away options, but I don't want to have a bunch of options that just aren't good for kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah. Tye, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a really fundamental question here. How is it decided who gets to go to a charter school?
So with our charter schools, it's a lottery system. So you put your name in a hat. It used to be like they turned the lottery just like the Georgia lottery and pulled your number out, but that's how it's done.
So it's a random lottery.
Yep.
Okay.
So sorry, John. One last question on this in this charter area. I can't make a judgment on your opponent, Roger, who's running on this issue, because I haven't talked to him about it in depth yet. But I think there is a spectrum of charter, of support for charter schools. When there is a limited targeted population looking to be served, when there is a particular innovation or subject trying to be taught, the choice schools, I think, are examples of that. I think in limited success, they're good. However, there are the Betsy DeVos's kind of, the right wing dream, so to speak, is to privatize the majority of education and then provide vouchers to families, right? So if everybody gets a $5,000 voucher, but the best schools all cost $8,000, then the gap of economic ladder is going to really be impacted there. Are vouchers the appropriate choice mechanism?
That would be an absolute no. You do not, I don't think we should take money away from the public school system to allow opportunities for private education. I've looked at the charter school system and looked at a lot of the cases where they did not work out. And if you have to choose between making money and education, if you're a private company, sometimes you will choose the making money, and that's going to be at the expense of our kids.
Gotcha. John's gonna take the next section, but I appreciate your answers on the choice in the charter school. Again, I believe there's got to be a balance struck, and I don't think Chatham County is a petri dish for people out of town to experiment with new types of schooling and charter movements to the extreme. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Tye, I attended the Georgia Southern WSAV candidate forum the other night. It was a great event. Glad to see a good number of people in attendance. Help me understand something. I heard two numbers relative to the school system's annual budget. I heard the number of 560 million, and then I heard the number of 464 million annually. Is that 464, the smaller number, your general fund budget, and you basically have $104 million capital improvement budget?
Capital improvement, actually, if you look at the totality of the money that is kind of funneled through the school system, is closer to $1 billion, right? Because it is the general fund, and what we're funded by the state and the taxes and the federal government and grants, Title I, all of that kind of stuff in that pile. And then you have our East Blast funds that go towards building our schools. So it is probably twice as much as what you're quoting there.
Okay, well, maybe those numbers are just reflective of the local Chatham County contributions, which makes sense. Okay. You know, in the comments and discussions at the forum the other night, I don't know if it was you or another candidate, but the concept of the general community adapting an enlarged definition or understanding of the school system could very well be helpful. And that extra dimension is public safety. And I was just enamored with that psychological connection, because I think, you know, people like myself, I'm sorry, my kid went to private school. He's an adult now. I paid my property taxes and never looked back. That's fine. But so many people, I think, in the community struggle with understanding how important what you do is. And if they thought about it, this is kind of a philosophical question, but if the general public would think about the investments that we make in education in Chatham County, if they would think of it as also an investment in greater public safety, I think it might find more traction, be more sticky for them in their thinking. Would that be fair or useful to get the community to think of it in public safety terms as well as a educational achievement term?
Yes. So we should look at it as educational factor, public safety, economics, all of that kind of stuff ties into our education system. You know, we have discussions in my household about, you know, the future of our community. And if we don't invest and pay for our kids now in a positive way, we will pay for them later in a way that we don't want to. You know, we see these cycles in Savannah, and I'm born and raised here. So not going to really give my age away, but I've seen a couple of decades go by, and you'll see investment in education and programming and wraparound services. And you can probably follow those children, and they've done really well. And you'll see a defunding or a lack of investment in those things. And you can probably trace it back to a decade where we stopped investing in our kids. So it is absolutely tied to public safety, because if kids are educated, if we meet their needs, social, emotional needs, economic needs in our school system, having those wraparound services and meeting the needs of the whole child, then they are more likely to become productive citizens when they graduate. So I think that you hit the nail on the head there.
Well, thank you. I don't know if there's a study or survey that's been done, but it sure would be interesting, Ty, to look at, uh, you know, 2 quarters or an entire year worth of Part 1 crimes and take a look at the educational achievement levels of those offenders. And
Right.
I'm willing to bet that it's going to swing over to the kids that came from the deepest pockets of poverty, had the least grade attainment. Maybe they dropped out at 9th or 10th grade. So thanks for that. Chuck, you want me to do a second question, or do you want to?
Let me follow up just with another, basic parent concern on the issue of safety. Does school violence warrant, a zero tolerance policy? We've just come off of 2 years of being cooped up at home. The kids are perhaps a little more rowdy than normal, to be expected. What are your thoughts on safety of students attending our system?
So I think we need to look at the fact that kids are angry. Kids, they have not had an outlet to express their feelings. And if we take on that zero tolerance policy, then we are missing the bigger picture, right? Why are our kids angry? Why are they depressed? Why are they having all of these behavioral issues? If we invest in wraparound services to uncover why our kids are behaving the way that they are, I think that's a better way to look at this problem than just, kicking them out or suspension or some kind of negative repercussion for their behavior, because we're not going to fix it that way.
Thank you. John, go ahead.
Ty, I understand that. How many students are in the system? 16,000?
Oh no, 37,000 roughly.
37. I'm sorry, 16
Yeah.
in the private arena and 30,000+ in the public system. Isn't it true that 2/3 of all your students in the system are Title I eligible students?
Roughly, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we don't have to be exact here. I'm working
Right.
conceptually towards a point here. So really, roughly 2/3 of the students attending the Chatham County school system are living in poverty. Fair enough. Either mathematical poverty based on government standards, or even worse, really deep poverty conditions. So I know the school system has to be struggling with 2/3 of your customers, I'll put it in a retail sense, coming to you with limited social skills and more anger issues and displacement issues and fear, and unlike the other third and most all of the students going to private schools. So how do we fix that? And what I'm really asking or hoping is that whoever becomes the president of the school board will build a consensus on the school board to use the bully pulpit to address the low wages in this community. Because I know you can't fix that, but the business sector can. The economic drivers and control levers are outside of the school system. Yet you deal with the trauma and the effects of the 26% poverty that exists constantly in this community. And I think the fix is somewhere else But what do you think about the idea of being a little more proactive than any other school board president has been historically, and occasionally start calling for better economic equity and opportunity, so that you can get that 2/3 number down to 50% or 40%, etc. What do you think?
So I think you're absolutely correct. What I think is maybe somewhat lacking is that relationship between the business community and the school system, right? I'm a small business owner, so I know what it means to, pay your employees a fair wage, what it means to hire people that have the skills to work. All of those things kind of tie into education. But what we need to do is bring the business community in and say, okay, guys, what is it that we need to do to make sure that we can produce economic stability for our community? I think that they're very open to those conversations. And how can we partner with you, even within our own school system, to start students maybe in high school or right after they graduate into these industries where they will get paid a living wage? We have those industries here. How can we connect those families and those students there? How can we create more opportunities for those families?
Yeah, thank you. I'll draw a parallel to this, and of course, the lack of affordable housing is a key focus and topic of discussion at City Council. And there's two components in that. Simplistically, one is the cost of a monthly apartment, and the other side of it, equally powerful, is your ability to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And the city seems to be extremely focused and determined to build a lot more inventory, but I don't hear it's deafening silence on the wage part of that dichotomy. So I'm glad to hear your answer, and my hope would be that we would have more candid, frank conversations about these things that interlock. And your problem, the way I see it, really is 2/3 of your customers are suffering from lack of economic standing. And if that component could get fixed to some degree, I think your educational outcomes and achievements are going to correspond and be higher as well.
Right.
It's the same kind of philosophical tangent that I suggested relative to public safety improvement tied to educational achievement. It's something we don't make a straight line connection to when we're processing paying our school property taxes, or having a neighbor whose kids are struggling in school. So anyway, I will ask you this. We Chuck and I talked in a Zoom meeting with a educational expert, Sid Chapman. And when Chuck gets back, he'll give us Mr. Chapman's credentials. What are they, Chuck? I mean, the guy's very pedigreed.
He used to be the head of the Georgia Association of Education and was a leader for the NEA, the National Education Association. Yeah.
Sharp guy, 30 years, 40 years of experience. And I asked him, I said, Sid, whether it's Chatham County or Gwinnett County in the state of Georgia, if there was only one thing you could fix, what would that be to get higher educational achievement? And he pretty quickly, Tye, said class size. He said, and so I said, what's too many? What's the right number? And he said 25 or less. And I said, in in high school, middle school, and lower school? He said, well, that would be ideal, but the most important is lower school. What are your thoughts on Mr. Chapman's prescription for improving educational outcomes by reducing class size?
Oh, so he is absolutely correct. Growing up here in our public school systems, I remember going to magnet schools, and I remember having, smaller class sizes and even smaller small groups. There were maybe 3 or 5 of us in that group that had specialized attention from our teacher or from our para to help us learn. I do this every day in our early learning center. We promote small groups. Why? Because it uncovers issues with children. It may uncover giftedness in children. If we don't have that close relationship and that one-on-one time with students, we can't properly educate them. We are a quality rated center at Chunks Learning Center, and that is part of the quality rated process, making sure that we're interacting one-on-one and have those small group sizes with kids, because that's the best way to educate them.
Yeah, I want to just follow up, and I'm going to put on the screen. I think the biggest thing we took away from our conversation with Sid was just kind of what education leaders and teachers, what they view as the issues versus kind of what the narrative of this campaign is been so far. So let me just put this up on the screen. For those of you who are listening, I'll put this as a photo on the podcast app. This is an NEA survey of education leaders. It's from 2019, so it's a little dated, but the issues I think are striking. The first thing I want to draw attention to is only 9 or 10% of people responding said school choice was their top issue. The number one concern, the number one concern tied amongst 2 issues was lack of parental involvement and too much focus on standardized testing. But right under that are cuts to specific programs like art, music, and physical education, and too many students per class. So one of the things that struck is I was not personally at the Georgia Southern Forum yesterday like John was, but I did get to watch a lot of the video content. And one of the things that struck me about your answers compared to the other candidates was your willingness to consult subject matter experts, right? And so, this is data from subject matter experts. Let's start with the class size and kind of work our way up on this list or up and down on this list here. What do you think about a proposal, to put a paraprofessional in every classroom, K through 5, as a universal policy?
Right. I had a para up until 4th grade in this school system. I went to a foreign language academy. I learned Spanish, Japanese, and French. I would not have been able to grasp those concepts had we not had smaller class sizes. So it's extremely important that we have that and that we invest in those things. Teachers, they are under pressure to do a lot of things, and they are under pressure to teach, especially in early education, K through 3, at least, the fundamentals that are going to take them throughout the rest of their educational career. So it is very important that we give them that support in the classroom.
Difficulty getting and retaining really good teachers. I don't know if you saw our show last week. We had a very large in-depth discussion on the Savannah Police Department, which is going as an organization going through its own troubles. But I feel that John, I feel like there's a lot of similarities in the organization. There's I think a lot of good teachers are leaving because of a lot of things. I think the pay is better in other systems in other parts of the state and around the country. I think there's been a long-standing distrust of what we refer to as 208 Bull Street, right? As the central office, there's a long-standing distrust, and everyone sees the system as inherently political. So on this issue of getting and retaining good teachers, what are your thoughts on what the system's doing now, and what would you like to see done differently?
And before Tye answers, I'm going to reserve space right after your comment to pitch an idea to you, Tye, about a funding source. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I think that our system could do a better job with supporting our teachers, our staff, not just our teachers, because we're talking about bus drivers and cafeteria workers, custodians. It varies from school to school, but in talking to the people that are in the system every day, they don't feel supported all the time or listened to all the time. And we have to stop that. I depend on my child's teacher, just like I depend on my child's pediatrician, as the expert in his or her field. And so therefore we should partner with them to see what their thoughts on best practices and how they can uplift our students and uplift our school system, and take those the things that they suggest and actually implement them. I do know that teachers, they need better pay all across this country. I personally think that teachers should be paid the most, because without them, we won't have doctors, lawyers, social workers, any of that. So I know that teacher pay is always an issue, and we do need to look at how we can increase the pay for teachers.
So one of the things that we're really well known for, and what John's going to ask you about, is that the episode series is called The Third Rail, because we don't pretend to be curriculum experts or anything. We have been able to learn a lot to connect with a few leaders and know some of the key issues here. But we're a lot of what our project and platform is about is just kind of changing the structural things that make up the system we have. And so a lot of that is about funding sources and about paying your fair share. And so John's going to talk a little bit about some of the funding sources.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. It's really just changing the wiring diagram just a little bit to be more of a best practice. But I do want to pause and say, I love your answer, Tye, that listening to teachers is critical for successes, and listening to teachers doesn't cost anything more. That's more of a professional dedication and style. Doesn't cost any more, unless, of course, you want to have the very best in every field and are willing to pay for it. Whether it's more teachers to reduce class size, or hiring paraprofessionals to augment the teacher. Here's my thought. eSPLOST is the general public likes eSPLOST. It passes by a considerable margin, a safe margin, and it is so maybe 12 years ago, when it first appeared as a capital project funding source, made perfect sense, and I think it still does. However, I think it would be a great leg up and solve some of these problems that you've addressed and that we're talking about, with a modification to the eSPLOST legislation that says that if you have a struggling school district, vis-a-vis Chatham County, with 2/3 of the students living in poverty or deep poverty, and likewise a very low academic achievement metric, why not take 10%, 5%, 10% of eSPLOST and use it exclusively for teacher salaries and paraprofessionals in the classroom? What do you think of that idea?
So first of all, I think that is a great idea to fund, staff, increasing staff pay. I do think that that is a decision that the board has to come to together, and that that happens at the state level. And if we agree that that is the way that we need to go, that has to be lobbied for. But I do know that when eSPLOST first came about, we had a lot of schools that were old and dilapidated. My parents went to some of the same schools that I went to, and so it's, some of my our grandparents. But I am open to innovative ways of funding, staff pay increases. So I think that that's a novel idea.
Great. I just am a believer that from what I've heard, what I've seen, teacher salaries are a problem. The number of staff and teachers is a problem. And that's only fixed by additional revenue so that you can hire more and hire better. And I'm not an advocate of changing the millage rate unless it's, it's the path of last resort. But you've got this huge windfall coming from eSPLOST, which is theoretically paid 40% by visitors, and utilizing that money in a very small way, just 10% of it, criteria based. You got to have a failing school system or a high Title I ratio. Makes sense to me, and I'm glad you like the idea. Chuck, you got another question, or you want me to go?
Yeah, this is, it's not something you mentioned that the state needs to take some actions. How active of a role are you going to take with the state? Because another thing, it did not quite pass the session this year, but I imagine it'll be reintroduced, is the ability for school boards to start assessing impact fees on new development. For example, if 5 subdivisions are built in 2 years with 10,000 homes, right? Sooner or later, you're going to need a school closer to them, or bigger than what's currently available. As we've discussed ad nauseum on this program, the tax base of those new developments are likely to take, years to be able to cover the costs of some of those, the infrastructure costs to provide those services. So what type of role do you want to take in advocating for changes at the state level?
Well, first of all, I am one vote on the board, but I have a working relationship with many of the board members. So coming to a consensus about what is best for our county and our school system, and lobbying for that at the state level, we have to have a relationship with those that are making the laws and the legislation for us to follow. So I am a big advocate of communication and relationships, just like I think we need to have, relationships with the community and our local business leaders. We also need to have a relationship with the state as well.
That's that makes sense to me.
Let's talk about our favorite new funding source, John.
Yeah. Tye, obviously, Taisha, what we're talking about here is the demand from all governments, whether it's county, city, or schools, on a limited tax base, right? There is considerable pushback now coming, long overdue, in my opinion, towards SCAD, who, essentially are escaping over $30 million a year in property taxes. I would think about 45-50% of that would be school taxes. Is it time that we deal with SCAD before they, double their size again like they have in the last decade? Shouldn't where does this end if they keep taking properties that are paying property tax off the digest? What can be done? Should we look the other way because they're an educational institution, or should we say, hey, enough is enough? Let's negotiate some fees in lieu of taxes, pilot programs, if you will. What do you think?
Well, I think that we need to examine the relationship that we have. Why isn't SCAD, paying its fair share? How can that benefit our community? And really communicate, with the school. It is, it's a decision that we cannot, the school board cannot make, but as a community, what can we do to increase funding from that source? I remember when SCAD was just, a couple buildings when I was little, and it has definitely grown. I do think that it has benefited our community with a lot of the things that they bring to Savannah, Georgia, and benefited the economy. But if it's time for that relationship to be looked at, I think that we need to have a really open and honest conversation about that.
I got several follow-up questions on this topic for you, as you can imagine. But first off, John, shouts out. I said to you yesterday morning, has hell frozen over? Because if you are a long-time viewer, and I encourage those who are here for your first time, this is our 82nd episode. We've been doing this for almost 2 years now on episodes here. A long-time recurring character in the Better Savannah podcast is Adam Van Brimmer, the opinion writer for the Savannah Morning News. And after, again, shouts out to Zoe Nicholson, who we did a story with in December for the newspaper, doing her 3-4 part series about SCAD as a gentrifier. Just amazing journalism. And just shouts out to Adam Van Brimmer for getting it right, coming along. And I want to highlight this line again for those of you listening. We're looking at Adam Van Brimmer's opinion piece in the newspaper published today or yesterday on Wednesday. SCAD's tax exempt status putting a little price on the schools, approximately $31 million in lost property tax revenues. So I want to rewind back to our pilot program episode, which we did have Commissioner Whitley, sit down with school board member Bringman and Alderwoman Keisha Gibson Carter to just talk about what they could do and why it's fair. We were talking about $3 to $3.5 million, right, from SCAD.
10% of what
it's about 10% of what their property tax bill would be if they were a for-profit institution. My question to you, Tye, is do you think that gap between a pilot program of $3.1 million and the lost tax revenue of $31 million is fair and in recognition of SCAD's cultural, academic, and economic impact for our area?
I think it's a start. If SCAD, they're not paying taxes right now, but if we can come up with a mechanism by which they could invest more, then why not start there? We have to start a conversation to get to where we want to be, right? Coming out and, attacking a school or a institution that has greatly benefited our community is not the way to start the conversation. We say, hey, SCAD, this is what we want. This is what we're looking at. What are you guys looking at? And kind of take it from there. I'm a big advocate of, proactive conversations and how we can meet the needs of the community.
Well, I was just going to say, we may be a little thorny at times in our approach, but far more polite people than us have attempted to have this conversation with SCAD,
Yeah.
and they were totally rebuffed, just as we were. So it's not us. It's SCAD is unwilling to comply with what is an ever-growing awareness in the community that there's got to be some reciprocal change here above and beyond what they do for sales tax revenue, et cetera, et cetera.
So my question would be, has the school system, the county, and the city sat down with SCAD all together? Because what I find is that we have a disconnect among the different levels in our community. What if we all sat down with SCAD and said, hey, this is how you could help our community? And let's be honest, helping our community helps SCAD,
everyone.
you know? So I think we need to start there, you know, and see where we can get if everyone comes to the table.
Great. Well, in the final kind of portion of our interview here, I want to focus our questions on your kind of just your philosophy of board governance. You know, you've been involved on boards in the nonprofit and private sector, and a lot of this job as the president is about group dynamics, about working with others. I think we've seen examples in our community of councils and commissions and authorities who don't work well when there's a big divide. How, you know, what are your thoughts on working with the other members of the board to build a consensus? And I've got many follow-up questions to this topic afterwards. Go ahead.
Right. So I am what you would call a servant leader. So I serve those that I represent, and each member on the board, they represent a district, right? So my job is to help serve all of the students and families and communities in Chatham County. So start there with servant leadership. It's never about me. It's always about what is best for our children. Secondly, I am a collaborative leader. We have about 21 employees at our learning center, and I don't make decisions without involving them. At the very least, asking them, well, what do you think about this? So that we can, you know, kind of get their view on things before we bring the hammer down and make a decision. If we remember that we are servants to those that elect us, and it's never about us, keeping our eye on the prize. And in this instance, it is education for children. We won't go wrong. And if we always are open and communicative, even when we do not agree, to build consensus, then I think that's kind of the second step in this process.
Almost every candidate for district seats has made a pledge to hold the millage rate the same. There are a lot of things that need doing. And we are, as we've discussed on this show, in the midst of a historic bull market for real estate where, you know, the digest is going to yield considerably more revenue to the school system in the coming years. How do you balance commitments made by the board members with, you know, kind of the direction, you know, you feel the system needs to take, or some of the goals and projects that you're supportive of the superintendent maybe? You know, how are you going to balance the economic realities of the funding being limited, but the funding is generous but limited. It's amazing. It's a lot of money, but most of it is like restricted, you know, in terms of it's either siloed off the capital funds or it's straight teacher salaries and benefits. There really is a limited amount of wiggle room. What are your thoughts on the coming budgets during your potential term?
So our school system is in a good position right now. We actually have a small surplus I wouldn't call it small in my opinion. Over $100 million is not small to me. But I do think that we are in a good position to invest in programming and wraparound services and supporting our teachers. We've been good. The taxpayers have been good to us throughout this pandemic. I am a homeowner and I am not for unnecessarily putting an undue hardship on our taxpayers if we do not have to. So if we can continue the trend, because the property values are rising in Savannah, so that means not even in Savannah, but Chatham County, that means more revenue for the school system. Let's take a step back, look at the revenues that we have, look at the projections of enrollment and what's coming in, and make the best decisions going off of that data. I'm a very data-driven person.
John, I'll have you ask the question, but let's finish with the agenda and stuff.
Okay. I'm curious how currently and going forward, if you're elected, there was a very significant change in the operations of City Council when this new council was sworn in. And what I'm talking about, Taisha, is the change in the rules of council. Whereas before this council, virtually any alderman could put an agenda on the item, put an item on the agenda, provided that they communicated that request well in advance of the public publishing of the agenda. I think 5 days before the meeting, and rightfully or wrongfully, Savannah went from any commissioner can add it to you have to add 5 votes, which is a majority.
And let me just follow up, John, because there is the record at the school board of this too. I think during Jolene Burns' term, there were slightly different rules. During Joe Buck's terms, there's been different rules. So
what's the current?
What is the current agenda set up for the Board of Education? Does the president make the entire agenda along with the superintendent? Is that the way it works?
So right now, I believe it's the vice president, the president, and the superintendent. I think they collaborate together to make the agenda.
Okay, but to your knowledge, if another member outside of those 3 wants something added as a subject for discussion, policy-wise, on the agenda, is it go on, or do you 3 have to vote to allow it?
So again, it's a collaborative effort. I am not aware of them striking anything down from the board. The current board has a really good working relationship. They respect each other. They respect each other's opinions and viewpoints. So I wouldn't see why, other board members' priorities or the priorities for their district would not be on that agenda.
Gotcha.
Well, if the raucousness at school board meetings are, it passes prologue with that, I don't expect that you'll always enjoy that type of relationship with the board, given that elections will change the members. For example, if you're president of the school board and 3 of the 9 members, which is again 1/3 of the body, want to discuss in open session an idea, even if they are aware it's probably going to get voted down, right? But they'd like to have it fleshed out a little bit and have it out on public record. What are your thoughts on, in traditional political science, you would call it the loyal opposition? What are your thoughts on allowing members of a policy body like that to, collaborate and try to express dissent, even if the majority of the board doesn't agree with them?
I don't think that we should shut down anyone's opinion or the concerns, especially because they represent a district, the concerns of those people in the district. So I think that an open discussion is good. I may learn something, they may learn something, and we actually may come to a consensus about, that subject. Now, what I don't want to do is waste the board's time on issues that we can't do anything about. It's great to talk about those things, but if it is out of our realm of, the things that authority, yes, then I don't think that we should waste the public's time continuing to talk about those things. However, we should bring light to any issues that come from the community.
Terrific. That's
John, any other questions you can think of?
No, I like Tye's answer. It's democratic, but it's tempered. It's like, hey, we're not afraid to discuss pertinent business as long as it's pertinent. And if it gets out of hand, we control the conversation. If we've heard enough, we've heard enough. We'll move on. But we want to hear what I hear her saying is every board member has a right to address and discuss issues that are district specific or otherwise. So I like the answer.
You would agree, just as a follow-up to it, you'd agree that requiring 5 members of the Board of Education to place an item on the agenda is extreme. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I wouldn't use extreme, but I would say that it's not
reasonable.
It is not conducive for a collaborative relationship. If we are constantly shutting things down, even if it's one person. I have 3 kids, right? And they all have 3 different opinions. And if I always go by the majority, somebody ain't gonna get to say something. So that's not right.
You're gonna have pizza every night for the next week. Yeah.
Oh,
I wanted to end our interview on this subject because for viewers and listeners, I mean, you will be leading 8 other people, and in collaboration, and I think it's important that I think one of your largest strengths is how even-tempered you are. And I'm not going to ask you to comment on your opponents, but just in the limited public remarks I've seen thus far, you seem to be amongst the most even-keeled, of the candidates in terms of just not out in front of your skis. I don't think it's that you don't show enough passion. I just think that you're wise, I think is a great way to put it. And I think that's a very good quality in a school board president. I think district candidates can, get behind specific issues and be the kind of rallying cry, whether it's school choice or safety in the schools or any of these things. So I really appreciate your answers on these questions.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys having me.
Absolutely. As we end, will you tell our viewers the ability to find you online and stuff so they can learn more about your campaign?
Yes. You can visit my website at www.vote4tye.com. You can also email me at campaign@votefortye.com. Follow me on Facebook at votefortye.com or Instagram at votefortye Whitley. I am always open to discussing any topic with anyone in the community.
I have one last question for you. You all 3 candidates are so collegial. The community's lucky to have 3 people such as they are running for this position. Would you give us a personal affirmation on each of your opponents? What do you see in them that you like?
Well, Todd Rhodes is very passionate about kids. I can tell that, and he wants to do what's best for them. And he's an all-around good guy, in my opinion. Roger Moss is, concerned especially about the arts, because he has that background in giving kids opportunities. So I think that they each bring their own set of strengths. I will say that I've had the opportunity to work with both of them at our center. We actually, Todd was a contractor for us, and then Mr. Rhodes, we did help him when he was going to open his new charter school to kind of get that information to our parents. So I've worked with both of them through, my own personal business. And so what I would say is that each of us have our own strengths. However, I will say that I have been in this school system on the ground level for over a decade, working with teachers and parents and guiding, students through the choice school process, parents through that process, funding things with grant writing, having programs like the Wise Guys and Girls program with Hofstra University. So I've been kind of in the weeds for a while, and I love it. I just think the school board presidency is an opportunity for me to do this on a much higher level and help more people.
Thank you. That was very kind and generous of you. Thank you for indulging that.
Absolutely. Again, we really appreciate you stopping by, and we wish you nothing but the best, and please stay safe out on the campaign trail.
Thank you so much, guys. Y'all have a good week.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Just before we end, John, a lot of comments across the social sphere. I think a lot of people are expecting for us to go into the hot button issues of critical race theory or these other things. And I number one, we are not subject matter experts in this area as much. However, the questions that we ask are about the overall structure of the local society we have, right? And so, there is a dynamic relationship between the school system and these structural questions we keep asking our leaders. I think it's important that the school board members and especially the president of the school board weigh in on those issues. It's not that parent concerns, teacher quality, the curriculum, it's not that those aren't important. It's that we're just not really in a position personally to be able to discuss those things at an in-depth length. I'm hoping in the future here we'll have some more subject policy matter experts on to discuss a little bit more of those specific issues, which again, I know are important, but in keeping in with the agenda that this organization was started was to really fight for the larger structural, architectural underpinnings of our local society, which again have a direct and indirect connection to the success of our students and therefore the future success of the city, whether that's measured in crime, poverty, whatever you want to measure it by.
Well, that was the thing for me, Chuck. The setup to the Tye interview and then the Todd Rhodes interview and the Roger interview. This nexus between educational achievement or lack thereof and crime, I'm really beginning to see the value of trying to create an awareness amongst the community that don't disengage from the subject of schools, public schools. If your kids are gone or going to private schools or you don't have kids, it's still important to your world and to our community because there is a nexus. The lower your academic achievement, your dropout rates, those things all track over to public safety, which right now is just on fire in the community.
It's definitely top of mind. Last week's episode, episode number 80, it was our most viewed episode ever, so I think it's resonating with a lot of people. Again, I'm amazed at how bipartisan our specific agenda is. There's just a wide range of people that just understand that at the local level here, these aren't partisan issues. This isn't even a partisan election for school board president. You know,
Chuck, it's almost economics, and I'll draw the comparison. As you know, and our regular listeners know, we've been telling you we've been doing policing and public safety on the cheap for the last 15 years at least, if not longer. We don't budget enough officers in our police budget, nor do we ever fill it. We're always down 10 to 20% in staffing on a staff level that's already too low. So we can't. I'm beginning to say and think we can't disregard educational outcomes in the public schools and do it on the cheap and expect improvements in our poverty rates or our crime rates or anything else.
I mean, look, class size in K through 5. I mean, that's clearly a funding and policy issue that's going to have a direct connection to student outcomes. Again, what needs to be taught by that co-teacher and that teacher, that paraprofessional, that teacher, and those things. I do think others can speak more in depth to that. But again, from a structural standpoint, tax bill, largest portion of the tax bill is this school system. Yeah. And remember whose taxes are going up the most: small business owners and renters, the working poor. So when we're talking about these structural changes and people paying their fair share, whether that's SCAD or home builders or whomever, it's important to remember that the working poor are getting hammered by property taxes. It is devastating to scroll through these Facebook groups and see the amount of desperation for housing and begging. If anybody know anything in this price range, need this, it's just not there. There's nothing to rent, for less than $1,300 a month.
I just put an apartment on Zillow. I know. Ads and
30 room inquiry. I know it's gonna go. It's gonna go quickly.
It's crazy.
So again, I just think our portion of this race for school board is about the structural questions of our local area, and there's a big bully pulpit in that school board president's chair that we'd like to see used just a little bit more. Yeah,
let's start connecting the dots in our goals. And I want to make a point that we're not shrill and saying SCAD can't exist. For goodness sakes, no. We're just saying SCAD needs to move 6 degrees off a center and be the neighbor and the community partner that they ought to be. We're not trying to stop SCAD. We're just trying to get them to bond and embrace the community like everyone else and help us create a better community. Pay a little bit into the most important area, which is our public schools, which have problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to the other candidates for school board president coming on. Again, next Thursday we'll have Todd Rhodes, who's a community activist, a longtime football coach, and a father of 10 in the school system, which I think is amazing. Somebody who's got a perspective as a parent more so than anyone in the race, for sure, as a parent of kids in the system. So looking forward to chatting with him. And then hopefully we can nail down a time to sit down with Roger Moss, the third candidate. I'll try to keep some dates open for some of the other races. I'm sure I see some comments on here from some other candidates for district races. I'm sure some of them would like to get their voices heard in these elections. And I'll do my best to try to open up some space and time for them to do so. You can contact us at bettersavannah2021@gmail.com. If you have anything, if you know anything about stuff, we got a lot of information from police officers and people who support the police officers here sent to us in the last week. I really appreciate that.
Yep.
If you watched the mayor's press conference, and again, I wish I had time to have cut this so we could show it to people. John, the mayor's press conference this past Tuesday was the most discombobulated I've ever seen him. I think this police issue is a real weakness. It's a real issue. There were so many contradictions in his answers. And just
Well, he's calling it
somewhat
an
offensive statements. I mean, talking about
the
something about how when
anomaly.
an officer is involved, in a shooting, he's not thinking about morale. Like, well, what kind of statement is that? So
And the equivocation, Chuck, the thing that drives me crazy is how many officer-involved shootings have we had now? 6 in the last 5 months?
6 months, one
6
each month, basically on average. Yes.
For the mayor he shouldn't have said anything, but he chose to say it's an anomaly. People
We're
died.
100 plus officers now. We're 20% down on our sworn police officer number, right? We're in the prime season of tourism right now, right? Which means a lot of the police force is concentrated downtown, and we have a staff that's undertrained, undersupported by leadership, and most importantly is on the force with less than 3 years of experience. It's a recipe for disaster. And if you call yourself a leftist or whatever, and you care about police officer involved shootings and not having any, then you need to start caring about the way this department is run and who it's run by and how many officers we have, because the lack of it running well is producing the excess officer involved shootings. The lack of the staffing, the lack of good leadership, to me, I can't understand why it hasn't been on the front page of the paper the last 3 months.
Well, you plant corn, you get corn, Chuck. I hate to be tropic about it, but I'm just incensed that the mayor described the death of a citizen and the trauma and stress related to that shooting by a police officer as an anomaly. I just think that was flat-footed, tone deaf, and inappropriate. So anyway.
Well, he's definitely monotone. This is a great interview. I thought this was a fantastic interview.
And I want to mention,
I want to bog our audience down with the negative stuff right now.
The Todd Rhodes and Roger Moss. If you watch tonight's episode, you got a head start. You got an open book test, because these are the basic questions we want to discuss with you. And
both of them are first-time candidates. Tye's done this before. This isn't her first rodeo.
Well, I mean, we're not here to ambush anybody. We're here to have genuine, thoughtful discussions about how to make things better in our community. And I think it'll be a pleasure to have both those gentlemen on our next 2 shows. And I know our audience will appreciate hearing from them.
Absolutely. Well, again, if this is your first time joining us, consider, going back through our catalog of episodes. You really can get a good idea for what's been going on the last 2 years here. And if you like this content, you support it, go on over to bettersavannah.org and click that join button. Or you can do it through patreon.com/bettersavannah. We do extra bonus content episodes for just our members, like the kind of prep show we had with Sid Chapman the other day. Who's, again, an education leader and policy expert that we're hoping to have on the show here in the next few weeks with these other interviews. And join us real soon for another episode. John, I appreciate you sitting down and putting a tie on, man. Appreciate that.
Happy to do it.
Always, man. Have a great night, everybody.
See ya.
Don't you think it's time for the city of Savannah to have an honest tourism management plan? Let SCCPSS start paying its fair share? And the hospitality industry needs to increase its wages? The impacts of new growth should not cost residents. All local elected officials on council and commission should have term limits. We're working hard to accomplish these policies. We need your help. Please contribute whatever you can, $5, $10, or $20, by going to bettersavannah.org. Donate. Thank you.
First and foremost, we have to remember that teachers are people, right? They like to go home to their families. They like to have support. They like to not be vilified when they are only following the rules that they were given to follow. We need to listen to our teachers. All the teachers across Savannah, Chatham County schools just want to be listened to, and they have those ideas implemented. We need to make sure that teachers are just getting simple things like breaks, that they're not standing up and eating their lunch while they are on lunch duty. that they get proper playing time. We need to make sure that we are investing in our teachers, that we have policies that recruit, maintain, and support the staff that we have. Because let's be honest, the pandemic has showed us that we don't want to teach our own children. So if we don't have teachers, we do not have anyone to educate our kids.